There we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Frank Analysis. I'm your host, Franco, here with you guys with a live panel here to discuss some differences in opinions about the Freedom Convoy, but I'm sure there's also a lot of agreement about this. I'm joined by Nick, aka Socialist MMA of Revolutionary Blackout Network, Glory Jones of Slow News Day, Fiorella Isabel of The Combo Couch, and Killjoy Meg. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Uh, we can go ahead and get started and talk about where we stand on this, where we stand on this Freedom Convoy. We can go around, and then from there we can just go back and forth. I'll take more of like a moderator status. I will, of course, put in my 2 cents about what I think about it, but we can start with Nick, man. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this has been something that was very interesting to me from the very start, and I like to analyze where movements are going and where like both political factions stand, where what they are asking for, and the reason why I was turned off from the two-party duopoly because I would see like a level of tribalism that where people would like reflectively like take a side. They would like plant a flag and they would be uncritical completely of that side, no matter what the cognitive dissonance that leads to. So my mindset is, especially coming from a citizen journalist, a poor working class black person, I am very clear about my biases. I tell people on my channel I'm probably the most biased commentator you'll find in politics because I unapologetically advocate for my community in the working class. That's my bias, and that always will be my bias. So when I see this truck convoy that happens, and I broke it down on my show, I see a lot of people who are serious on both sides. While I see people smear the trucker convoy at white supremacist movement, where that, to me that's preposterous to say that millions of people. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like 20% of truckers. Like when you look at the vast amount of people, like that's ridiculous, right? To just blanket a whole movement as white supremacists. So I'm like, all right, what's the best way to actually analyze the movement? So I came up with three things. Do you support the ask? Do you support the people? Or do you support the tactics? So I want to filter all the culture war bullshit because that's something I'm getting frustrated as well. This is becoming a culture war, a distracting culture war. That's part of my criticism of this as well. There are a lot of working class strikes and protests that are getting on that being drowned out by this movement that we got to ask, which I support easily 2 out of 3 of those things easily. I support the ask because I'm anti-mandate. I support the tactics because this is why I believe we need to overthrow global neoliberal capitalism. So if you're like, oh my God, it's shutting down local economies, businesses are losing millions of dollars. What do you think a general strike is going to look like? Like, how can you not support the tactics? So that's easily 1 out of 2, right? My thing is like when I see like the right wing capitalists, this is where I talk about people. Once again, this is not like me overall just throwing the movement on the bus, but when I see capitalists who don't support none of the other worker strikes support this, I start asking like, okay, where is this movement going? So I support the ask, I support the tactics, but like when I see the people and when I see what they want, when I see some people that may have anti-worker history on that, that's why I'm like, okay, what do you guys want out of this protest? So there's an element that must be critical that way as well. So that's kind of where I stand. Oh yeah, so the point I was making earlier, because I unapologetically advocate for my community, right? So I call out cognitive dissonance when I see from progressives all the time when they say they support good things, right? And my goal right now, and I take advantage of any situation. This is the last thing I say, and I'll pass it back to the panel. Any situation that I see that can break the cognitive dissonance of my oppressors, I take. So there are a lot of people, which don't apply to anyone on this panel, as far as I know, because if you're on the left and you're anti-mandate, I don't see inconsistencies. To be clear, this is why I don't think I'm going to argue with you guys that much. The inconsistencies I see come from the right, the populist right that supports this movement, where they pretend that authoritarianism was invented in 2020. Like you got people that say they will vote for the Republican Party because of mandates when they support the Patriot Act. You guys see how this doesn't make sense? So I'm calling those people out in the movement. And some people got frustrated at me for doing that. But hey, if I see people going against protests that support my ass or my community, and I see them being hypocrites, I'm gonna call that out. So I apologize for going long, but that's in the broad nutshell why I've been standing on this protest. So I'll pass it back to the panel.
All right, we can go with Fiorella. Where do you stand?
Well, I support the trucker convoy movement as a working class movement, and that has been the issue that I've been having with a lot of Twitter leftists or Twitter communists that say, well, this isn't working class. These people own their trucks, they're petty bourgeois. And it's like, well, a lot of them actually don't own their trucks. And so, like, if somebody owns their car and they're an Uber driver, does that make them not working class? You have to really touch reality here. I feel like a lot of people are stuck in theoretics, like in theoretical situations.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really apply what's happening now, what's happening today. They've made a religion out of whatever it is they believe in, just like a lot of the liberals made a religion out of COVID. A lot of, right wingers have their own religion. I feel like a lot of people have made a religion out of like theory, Marxist theory, and like I support reading theory, but there is this cognitive dissonance that is happening with how a lot of these intellectual people come in and they don't know how to talk to the working class. They've never once stepped foot inside working conditions, yet they call themselves Marxists. And I have a really big problem with that because this is a workers' movement. Workers of the world unite. I mean, it was never like, well, unite only if blah, blah, blah. It was like, if you're a worker, unite. And like, I feel like that's happening. And the left in the United States and the left in Canada hasn't done that. We haven't been able to do that. And yet, this movement comes up. It's an anti-mandate movement, and I just did an article recently pretty much highlighting how the working class is suffering under these like under these mandates, because there are people who will lose their health care, who will lose their benefits, who will lose like the ability to really be the providers for their family if they lose their jobs. But they could also lose their life because they don't know how the vaccine is going to offend with a cancer treatment. There's still not enough information, so there's a reason why a lot of people are opposing it, and whatever reasons they may have. It's largely a lot of people of color, it's largely a lot of minorities, and it's largely a lot of people of working class. So when I see something like that spring up, of course I support it. And for me, it's like, and I agree with Nick that there are some criticisms to be had, but I'm also of the belief that these people are in Canada, and like we have a different system in
Mhm.
Canada here than they do in Canada. They have healthcare, they have other things, and like they're to the left of us generically, like people in government. So it's gonna be a little bit different. And I think a lot of American leftists tend to see things the way things are here and apply that to the rest of the world. And so while I think there could be improvements into saying, well, where do we go from mandates? Where, because the issue that I have is they want to go to before. They want to go back to what it was like before the mandates, when things weren't well before the mandates either, right?
Mhm.
And so in order to take it to the next level, you would have to really sit down and talk to people and really like see where they're coming from. But that's not going to happen if you sit there and call them all white supremacists. If you sit there and call them all right wingers, which I think that's the issue I have with the most, that people have been discounting these people as a bunch of right wingers just because a few billionaires or a few people who are right on the right got involved. And like there's always going to be co-option of movements. I followed the BLM protests like all throughout 2020. I went to Seattle, Portland, all throughout Los Angeles. I went even to Florida. I went to different states, and I saw how that protest was not monolithic. I saw how there were a lot of internal conflicts. I also saw how people left the centric organization of BLM because there was a lot of corruption by Patrisse Cullors and others. And I interviewed those
Mhm.
people as to why they were upset with it and they didn't really feel a part of it. But I never once said, oh, because there's some money ties to George Soros, and because of this, that you have to discount the whole thing, which is what the right said. And there is hypocrisy on the right. There is, because
Mhm.
they don't see things like, they don't come at the anti-mandate thing the way I come at the anti-mandate thing. It's a completely different reason. But at the end of the day, I think right now we're facing a lot of authoritarianism and a lot of surveillance. And I think if we don't protect the people's right to have dissent, the people's right to protest, then we're not going to be able to even argue about which ideology is the best, because we're not going to have the tools there. It's the same way I feel about free speech and why so many people are for Julian Assange, because what's happening now to a lot of people, what Canada is doing, what Trudeau's government is doing, setting a really, really dangerous and scary precedent that they're basically stopping mutual aid. They're basically freezing people's bank accounts with any affiliation just because somebody says so. And that is extremely fascistic. And so I think a lot of the left doesn't understand power. They look at the handful of, Trump supporters or right wingers as more of their enemy than the people in power. And I think that our enemy as a whole, even if there are assholes that are racist, our enemy as a whole are the racists that are actually in government, the people that are pitting us against each other, the people in suits. Those are our common enemy. And I think we really need to understand power a little better.
All right, let's go with Mag and then Glory.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I'm much more on the same level as what Nick was saying. Like what Nick was saying, definitely, that's how I feel about most of what's been happening. Is that, and I feel like just based on like a couple of the Twitter comments that I've seen on my conversation that I had with Pat and Paul, that maybe there's a misconception that I am against the trucker convoy, which I'm not. I have not taken an actual stance, a position on the trucker convoy. And most of my criticisms that I've had of it have strictly been about the people who were organizing and leading the movement, considering they were a part of the People's Party of Canada and were part of Wexit and do have some white supremacist links. But that's the only criticisms that I've had of it. And also, as Nick was saying, kind of, okay, but where does this go from here? What are y'all, like, if you're not supporting other workers' movements, what exactly is the end goal here? Like, why are we wanting to support a movement being led by, people who are involved in Wexit and things like that? Like, what is, and that's basically been my criticism of the whole thing. I support anyone who is going to be fighting for workers, but I do have a problem if I don't see them. Okay, once we get rid of the mandates, what happens next? It's like, are you fighting for other worker protections? Are you fighting for, more paid leave? Are you, fighting for a vaxxer test policy, which I think would be better than a hard mandate? I'm very against hard vaccine mandates. That's something I think we can all agree on, is that none of us want the vax mandate because it is very oppressive, particularly of working people. And especially, and I think Fiorella was right that we can't look at this within the same context as the United States, because we don't have a lot of the, foundation and a lot of the infrastructure that Canada has. I'm from Canada. The healthcare system in Canada saved my life. And so it's definitely different, and especially different when we're talking about a country that already has a 90% vaccination rate. Like, Canada has a 90% vaccination rate, so it makes no sense to keep these mandates in position when, okay, so what exactly are you trying to do to force this last 10% of people to get vaccinated? It makes no sense. And also, I am very much against what Trudeau is doing in basically coloring them as terrorists. Like, that is just taking it to an extreme level that is just ridiculous. Like, calling them terrorists, freezing their accounts, that is authoritarianism. Like, these people are not terrorists. Because especially in Ottawa, or being on the bridge between Windsor and in Detroit, like, being uncomfortable is not terrorism. Being made uncomfortable is not terrorism. Being inconvenienced is not terrorism. You know what is terrorism? Locking up BLM protesters and throwing them into unmarked vans. That's terrorism. So let's be just clear about what exactly is going on. Like, I can be critical of some of the elements of the truck convoy, but also be, as Nick said, be okay with the ask, being okay with the tactics. And I think that's a good point that Nick made. And I also agree with Fiorella that we can't be demonizing the trucker convoy just because some of them are, owner-operators. Because, okay, do we have a problem on the left with, like, small business owners? Because that's one of the things, like, I feel like that's, like, a very clear misunderstanding of the difference between capitalism and commerce. Like, just because, like, in leftist circles, like in communism and in socialism, there's still going to be commerce. We can't get mad at people for wanting to own as as Fiorella kind of pointed out about like Uber drivers, we can't be mad at people who own their vehicle and are using that vehicle as for their work. We can't be mad at that. Like, we have to have an actual understanding of what exactly all these different things mean. I feel like this conversation is very important because, as I was saying, like, there are nuances, and unfortunately Twitter is not a good place for nuance, and I feel like these conversations are so important. And so, I mean, that's where I stand on this.
All right, go ahead, Glory.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to causes and when it comes to large movements, first and foremost, I look at the cause, and I look at kind of what people's convictions mean above anything else, really. I don't care to, having supported Black Lives Matter for so long and having been on the ground and a part of that movement for so long, I don't tend to look at massive astroturfers or even large scale organizers, really, because the unfortunate fact of the matter is, when it comes to large movements that are worth something, those people are so often co-opted, as we've seen with something like Black Lives Matter, and as we're seeing with something like the anti-mandate movement. So I mean, when it comes to fighting mandates, that's so important, first of all, not only on this level of representing the working class, especially people of color and Black people who are of the working class, who would be most adversely affected by the mandates, because simply based of the fact that they don't have the vaccine. And, plenty of them have good standings to not get the vaccine and not want the vaccine to begin with. And that's not true with just the American and Western working class. That's true especially with the global working class, with places like Africa, who have the lowest jab rate in the entire world. And they've managed to beat COVID, as some scientists have said that they've reached the endemic stage with COVID. And yet people are still trying to force vaccinations on them with the attitude of the most white savior of white savior you can think of. So I think that coming from that standpoint, it's important to oppose mandates, but also as to what vaccine mandates bring to the future. They're being used, initiatives like Good Health or the Smart Pass, I believe, in California. They're being used to usher in the digital ID, which is a critical part of the fourth industrial revolution infrastructure that's going to usher in a whole new atmosphere of surveillance, of social credit, of just this incredibly pervasive commodification and an absolute state of surveillance capitalism. And it's going to be really really awful and just dehumanizing, especially when it comes in. And unfortunately, this has been something that's been said by global shapers themselves. The vaccines are a very critical part of that. Giving your health data to the government is a very critical part of that, especially a government like Canada or like the United States, which is already built on genocide of various groups of people. So it's dangerous to essentially submit to medical tyranny to these people, which is why, first and foremost, I think that we can take a stand against this infrastructure that's being ushered in, that's going to essentially crush us all under the boot of surveillance capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, this extreme form of wealth consolidation that's coming our way. So first and foremost, I think I keep that into perspective, and I say, fuck yes, support the truckers' mandates, especially when something like a blockade is providing an opportunity to quite literally divert resources away from the empire into the people. I mean, regarding the astroturfers, regarding the hypocrisy from the right, that comes when you approach them on the ground. That comes when you approach them at their cause. And that's something that I've been doing with Black Lives Matter too. It's something that I do regardless of political sides, because I really don't see left and right when it comes to this thing, especially when you consider kind of the global perspective surrounding this whole thing. I mean, for 90% of the world outside of America, they don't give a shit about Republicans or Democrats. And for many parts of the world, they don't give a shit about red versus blue, left versus right. What it should be is about the causes and fighting that. What it should be is about like letting your freedom and the conviction for that carry you into the cause, regardless of who there. Because I come at this from this perspective. People kind of suck, so I tend to get my conviction for a cause to carry me into these things because I mean I'm in Los Angeles where there are so many anti-mandate protesters that are just straight up fucking assholes. But despite that, I'm still supporting the cause because I don't really care about all the partisanship behind it. And I think that I wish that more people would approach it from that perspective, not just coming into it because, oh, my team's against it or oh, my team's for it. I think you should look at the cause and take a holistic and global approach to that. And yeah, I've been rambling a bit. So yeah.
Yeah, if anyone wants to address anything anyone said here when they gave their take, you guys can go ahead and do that. Just, let's have a back and forth.
This is the
Yeah.
one thing I want to ask you guys because I know some of you guys have been following this more than I have, and this is why I've been putting pressure on some of the right wing allies in this fight. I guess who believe in that support us. I see like I see the Democratic Party. I see Joe Biden moving away from mandates. And once again, you guys probably been following this closer than me, so correct me if I'm wrong here. I've seen the neoliberal establishment ease COVID restrictions. So another question I've been having, I'm like, you guys are winning. Like you guys are protesting, but you guys are winning. So now what? So I pass it back to the panel. That's been one of my things I've been raising about. Like I don't know why you guys are still upset. Like you guys are winning. You guys like COVID restrictions are getting down. So now where are we going? So did anyone want to
Yeah.
address that? That's the only
So
question I have.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, that's why going at the counter narrative is so important as well, because when you have such big issues, there's always going to be a counter narrative to come with it, as is with every major issue or every major psyop. And in this case, the counter narrative would be something like, yes, if you want to win, vote Republican, or oh, if you want to win, vote Libertarian. And that's where it becomes important for independent people to say, no, this is your sign more than anything to get the fuck away from the empire and divest from that. I think that's what this is showing more than anything, because the unfortunate fact of the matter is with with the vaccines, a lot of health data has already been signed away to the government and to the surveillance state, which is why they can feel the need to kind of back down, especially when they have the insurance of that counter narrative in play that's funneling people right back into the system. So that's why it's important to go at kind of the counter narrative as well.
So I don't think we are winning, and I don't know what who we is in terms, because I feel like if we're all against mandates, it should be everybody's fight because of the authoritarianism that comes with it, because of the fascism that's coming with it. The vaccine passport is what's next. Like the not just vaccine, but health pass. I've talked about this before. There's a Talus pass that's going to be implemented. There's all kinds of things that are coming. The COVID vaccination was only just one aspect of it, a sort of Trojan horse to come and bring everything else in. And so when I see, for example, T-Mobile employees have to be vaccinated by April 2nd, despite the Supreme Court ruling that said that the government cannot mandate people, mandate private companies to force vaccinations. That doesn't mean that private companies can't do it, and they're doing it, and they're doing it also by state governments and local governments. California is attempting to pass. State Assembly member Buffy Wicks just introduced a bill to make vaccine mandates a thing in California. Same thing is happening in New York, especially with children. I went to New York to talk to some people about that. And so all of this is happening under the radar. And so I wouldn't say that there is this sort of, okay, we're done with COVID. It's more of like, what is the next thing? And that's what they're doing, is they're going to usher in more control, more surveillance. For example, during the war in Iraq, after 9/11, right? After 9/11 and post the Iraq war, we lost so much of our civil rights and so much of our civil liberties. You can not go to the airport the way you used to anymore, and you're never going to get that back. So you have to understand that the more each event that happens passes, the more civil rights and civil liberties you lose that you will never get back. Not just COVID, but even January 6th, how people reacted so vitriolically, with so much vitriol to these right wingers, which I was there. I covered it on the ground. I was more focused on the election aspect. But what I saw and what I reported was completely different than what was reported in mainstream media that was hyper focused on, the individuals that went in there that were let in by the police, even though we were surrounded for March for Medicare for All, or Force the Vote, and Assange, like days before, we were surrounded by police. So it was an obvious psyop. And what I'm saying is, after that, they released a domestic violent extremist bulletin alert naming anybody that's anti-establishment or speaks out against the government a domestic violent extremist. Fast forward to
Mm-hmm.
the trucker convoy and COVID, the COVID narrative falling apart, which it has been falling apart, and it's extremely important to point that out. And so now they're saying if you're speaking out against COVID, or undermining the people's trust in the government, which, as if the government hasn't been doing that for decades, but they're saying if you're doing that, or if you're speaking about the elections, you are also now going to be branded as some sort of terrorist. And that they're telling you what they're doing, but people aren't paying attention. They're more interested in petty discussions between what's left and what's right, and who is a worker and who isn't a worker, when we're all being crushed by this surveillance system. And this is only the beginning. Bill Gates just told MSNBC that he predicts that although COVID is coming down, there will be a new pandemic soon. How would Bill Gates know that if he's not some sort of involved? I mean, these people tell you what they're going to do. You just have to pay attention. And I think it's so much more than, we're winning. I don't think we're winning. I think the COVID narrative has kind of crumbled based on a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people, independent voices doing a lot of work, and people getting smeared left and right. People, like, all this division happening, still being called anti-vaxxers for being anti-mandate, for asking questions, and questions that should be asked, because from the beginning we were lied to about this whole damn thing. And like, I've never been I've always been a pro-vax person. I've gotten every single vaccine in my entire life. And just for questioning the way this was done, which any sort of lucid person that isn't involved in some sort of, I don't know, mass formation, like neurosis or whatever you want to call it, would understand. And so to me, this is just much bigger than, just the literal aspects of what you see on the surface. It's more of like, what are the connections, the global
Yeah.
connections, as Glory was saying.
It also depends on where you are in the world too, because I mean, there's differences in policy between like California and Florida, for instance. There's vast
That's why I'm
you
biased.
if you watch like Davos, if you watch the Davos panels back in January, you'd swear that like Africa was still in the middle of, you'd swear that Africa was having some grand global crisis based off what they were discussing from, we need a massive global public-private partnership to ensure that we get all the vaccines necessary to Africa, as South Africa is essentially virtually open and several West African countries believe in the power of prayer over vaccine, as proved by a couple of polls. I mean, like, it honestly depends on where you are in the world, because in places like the Netherlands or in France, or in Australia and New Zealand and other Five Eyes countries, they're still very much fighting against the mandates. And there's still very much a global agenda in play that revolves around getting these vaccines to people. And there's still a very much global agenda in play that's like Fee said, that's using the vaccines as a Trojan horse to get everybody on the digital ID. That's why you see them resorting to other methods with children, like in Ethiopia, for instance. There was a deal between Abiy Ahmed and Cardano to put 5 million Ethiopian school kids on the blockchain. They don't need, they don't need to worry about a vaccine when they have other deals like that being taken place. They don't need to worry about a vaccine necessarily when Facebook and other companies, such as Chinese companies, etc., have a To Africa initiative to encircle the continent of Africa with a giant subsea cable. I mean, there's many other, well, not many, but there's other ways that they can try to bring about this agenda to put us under this boot of this incredibly oppressive social credit surveillance capital, stakeholder capitalism, whatever you want to call it, system of global tyranny and technocracy. So it's important that we keep an eye out for all of those things and look to stop it as well, alongside obviously fixing the problems that we already have.
Yeah, I want to jump in here with just a point. I just want to jump off the point that Fiorella was making about like fast passports and basically reducing this whole conversation of being anti-vax to being anti-mandate to being anti-vax, which I think a lot of us can agree that that's not the case at all.
Oh yeah.
Because like as Fiorella said, like I've taken basically every single vaccine that was given to me from birth. Like I've never had a problem with vaccines, but the conversation around the COVID vaccine is way different from like getting like the Hep C whatever whenever you were in middle school or whatever, because one sorry, I just lost track of my thought for like 1 second, but so one, like, we all know that the efficacy of this vaccine has not been good.
It's garbage.
People who are vaccinated can still catch, spread, and die from COVID. So we can call this the pandemic of the unvaccinated, but we know that that's not true because we see, like, even though like the likelihood is lower when you are vaccinated, that risk is not gone. It's not gone. So if you were to catch COVID, even though you were vaccinated and spread it around, like, I'm sorry, but to blame that on unvaccinated people is absolutely ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So what? We keep the vax mandates, but we continue to spread the virus because vaccinated people are still spreading it? Like, that narrative is stupid. And also their whole narrative about, oh, well, vax mandates have been around forever. You can't go to, some, tropical country without getting the malaria vaccine. Well, the malaria vaccine, again, is different. And also, you don't have to go to that country if you don't want to get the malaria vaccine. You don't have to go there. It's different when the mandate is being linked to your job. You cannot do your job without getting vaccinated. Like, as these truckers are showing, like, they can't go to different provinces. They can't go to United States because of the vaccine mandate, because of the vaccine passports. Like, it's completely a different context than saying, oh, well, you can't go without a malaria vaccine to this country when you can choose not to go. This is not a choice. When IKEA is cutting back sick leave for people who catch COVID unless they get vaccinated, that is not right. Because guess what? If they don't get vaccinated, one of them will either lose their job, or even if they do get vaccinated, if they don't get vaccinated and they get sick, and then what? Are they going to come to work because they don't have sick leave? Are you freaking kidding me? Like, that's completely bogus. Like, and that's something that should not be, that's not something that should be agreed upon. Like, we can have conversations about this vaccine, we can have conversations about the vax mandates, but we can't compare the COVID vaccine to other vaccines because they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. So you can't paint someone as being anti-vax because they are against this specific vaccine. There's a lot of skepticism, especially when we had Kamala Harris on stage saying that she wasn't going to get vaccinated because she didn't trust Trump. I'm sorry, am I the only one who remembers this? That Kamala Harris is one of the people who said she was skeptical about getting vaccinated because of the vaccine was being developed under Trump?
A lot of Team Blue were skeptical, and then it changed.
Yeah, this was actually something.
It's like, so, but
yeah,
I'm sure that's misinformation, right?
Yeah, this was actually.
Go ahead, Glory.
Oh, I think Glory's frozen.
Oh.
Glory? Oh man, she's about to spit some fire, and
oh man,
she froze. All right, she'll come back, and then I'll get her.
My internet came. I was gonna say that was actually so. I know it froze at the perfect time. I love it. I was gonna say this was actually something I covered with Nico House, and that video ended up getting removed. So yay! But it speaks to what Meg. Yeah, it speaks to what Meg was saying though about automatically getting smeared as some crazy conspiracy theorist. I mean, like, I question the vaccine efficacy. I question the agenda that it's ushering in. And I don't even get called an anti-vaxxer. I get, like, step skipped to the point where I'm being called a flat earther. And I'm like, first of all, how the flying fuck would me being a flat earther threaten you in any way? And it's like, that's when it clicks that that one of the purposes of this whole pandemic thing is also to essentially criminalize, in a sense, with a new DHS memo we saw recently, and to really push to the fringe a lot of any alternate thought in general. And that's the agenda that we see being pushed by a lot of global shapers, especially, it wasn't this year but last year on Davos, when discussing ways to protect press freedom, which included nothing of fighting for incarcerated journalists and founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. The things that they talked about protecting press freedom revolved around suppressing conspiracy theories and guarding misinformation and essentially being gatekeeping fucking pricks. So it makes sense that COVID breaking people's brains would usher in this whole new thing of like alternate thought in general just being a complete taboo. It's like, no, you're harming people by being this. You're harming people by thinking this. No, I'm not. The people harming people are the ones at the top that are pressing their boot onto your neck right now. It's nothing to do with me questioning their agenda to press their boot on your neck. So
yeah, can I jump up on that real quick? So
Yeah.
this is actually one of the main reasons why I have a huge problem with the vax mandate, is because, especially here in the United States, this is basically them saying like, okay, so get vax and get back to work. Okay, but what exactly have they done to protect workers? They have done jack shit. They have done zip nada. And this is one of my biggest problems, as I said. Basically, this vax mandate is putting the onus on individuals instead of putting it on the people who are in power, who are leading these corporations, and also as well, taking all of that onus away from them and putting it on us, making us fight each other instead of the people who are actually in power. Because basically this vaccine mandate is basically saying, you know what, you need to get vaxxed because we're not going to do anything else for you. You're kind of shit out of luck. We're not going to build an infrastructure of a public health system. We're not going to put in worker protections for you. Like if we look at the, I don't know if y'all have read about the, it was the Rhodes Scholar who was basically the one who helped Starbucks start their unionization. And one of the reasons that she started was because they were looking at the worker protections that Starbucks put in, and they were telling the executives of Starbucks, this is not good enough. We need more protections than what you're actually giving us. And Starbucks was coming back to them saying, well, we're going above and beyond what the CDC told us to do, so you're just going to have to deal with it. We're doing enough. When the workers were telling them, no, you're not. So they walked out of Starbucks, and that's what started this whole unionization drive at Starbucks. So basically what's going on is they're taking away all of those. They're not giving us enough protections. They're not doing things like paid sick leave. They're not doing things like giving us a universal healthcare system. They're not canceling student loan debt or canceling rent and mortgages. They're not doing any of that shit. They're putting all the onus on us. They're saying, no, this is your problem. We're not going to do anything to help you. And that's the big thing that I have a problem with. This is basically them saying, get vaxxed and just shut the fuck up. Because we're not doing anything for you. Sorry, you're out.
And then we know who's profiting most off of that. These corporations and the revolving door with them and the public sector. But there was already a problem that existed there before the Rona. People were already getting poisoned by stuff that's in their food, stuff that's in these pesticides, herbicides. It poisons us, makes us dependent, and keep coming back to the big pharma drug dealers to treat our disease.
Gets into the ocean with runoff, then poisons the fish that we eat, and
then we consume that.
Yep.
And then all this stuff is linked to our mental health problems and everything.
And yeah, environmental protesters are the problem, not the corporations who are doing it.
And it affects disproportionately poor communities more than more wealthy communities. So there are people that are not going to be as informed as us, because that's just the power of propaganda these days. Mainstream propaganda has been manufacturing people's consent, keeping them blind. But some people can see, okay, something's not right here. What they lack is some evidence that everyone in this panel may hold that can help inform these people and help them understand further about what exactly is going on. So that's why when I see like a freedom convoy or any other protest where people are correct on the principle, standing against this power, they might not have all the plans laid out of what they want further down the line, how this is connected to all these other issues, how this is connected to environmental issues, because it's the same people at the top that control all this stuff. So when I see something like that, like the Freedom Convoy, I see it as an opportunity to help inform these people even more. And there are people that are there that, well, first there are people that are trying to discredit this protest, saying that, oh, the police are standing with the people. Like I see them taking selfies and everything. And I'm like, that's the exception. That's not really the rule. And at the end of the day, what power wants them to do is to crack down on these people. And I mean, that's what we see happening here with the police cracking down on the protesters. They're beating on these people. Of course, this isn't anything new to what happens to minorities, especially here in the United States. But I want to get your thoughts here, panel. What do you think about, I mean, what I mentioned and the crackdown that's happening to these protesters by the police?
I'll say real quickly, you want to talk about someone who's out there getting work done, trying to get people to see the bigger picture and helping build communities. Corey Morningstar, amazing journalist and researcher. She writes for Art of Annihilation and Wrong Kind of Green. She's on the ground there doing amazing work. So if anybody wants to follow El Provocateur on Twitter, she's done great work on the ground at these protests. But yeah, going into the point of police brutality, it's fucking disgusting. I mean, it's you know, there are people being trampled by horses, which is just like, I think I was talking about this yesterday with some friends last night. Shout out ICU and Prop and Jack Sith and Charlie in chat. I mean, like, first of all, it's fucking animal abuse, because what purpose does bringing horses to these massive crowds serve? I mean, I've been on the ground in Los Angeles where they have brought horses to try and crowd control Super Bowl crowds and LA Dodgers celebrations, and it's completely asinine to think that horses can serve any purposes beyond abusing them and trampling protesters there. On top of that, it's utterly disgusting and criminally fascistic to see what Trudeau and the police are doing to protesters here. I mean, they're standing, what these protesters are doing, whether they believe it or not, they're effectively standing up to an empire. They're holding the line. They're helping halt this global agenda to enslave us further. So, and of course, it's going to be a threat to the point where they have to unleash these police forces on them and have these crackdowns on them. And I mean, it's happened all over the world too. There's been police brutality in the Netherlands to the point where UN Special Rapporteur on Torture Nils Melzer had to investigate it. There's been police brutality in Australia. And, you know, this is obviously coming off the heels of all the police brutality that happens in the US, but it's continued as a result of these protests. And in any instance, I mean, fuck 12. Like, in any instance, fuck 12. It's disgusting to see these instances of police brutality, regardless of where it's happening. You know, I'm not going to side with police in any instances, regardless of whether I agree with the person that they're beating the shit out of or not. I mean, it's and I have my little ACAB pig here, so yeah, fuck 12. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so the number one battle that we have right now, there's so many people that are stuck in like 2014, if that, right? Where I think our number one battle is against the national security state and against the police state. Right? Now, this is why I don't understand why people on the left are allowing the right-wingers to have peace in this movement. Because I have been going crazy the last week or so. I just saw Tucker Carlson do a segment complaining about the brutal police brutality that's going on in Canada. But this same guy used to cheerlead, and he actively still does, the police brutality against our people. So Slow New Day, I love the guy, but he was like, why are you making this about race? Because it's 100% about race. Because I demand to know why the populist right, and not even them, the liberal class, because they support the police state as well. Why are you guys against this? But you guys And once again, this applies to nobody on the panel. Because once again, this conversation would be way more interesting if I was talking to someone on the right. Because that's where most of my criticism comes from. These same people who all of a sudden discovered authoritarianism in 2020 was 100% supportive of the police state. These same people all of a sudden they learn what civil asset forfeiture is, but they want to give the police more money. The Democratic Party is giving the police more money, and I have people like Slow News Day. I like the guy, but he asked him, Nick, why are you bringing up this divisive conversation? Why not just show unconditional solidarity to the protesters? And I'm telling you guys why. Because the black left is being crushed. The police state is winning, and this is why I asked you guys the question: Isn't and you guys mentioned in the course of the last 20 minutes, right? You guys kind of proved me right. Because over the last 20 minutes, you guys debunked the COVID narrative in an amazing fashion, right? They are losing. This is my position. They are losing control of the narrative. We all know this. Joe Rogan gets 10 times more views than CNN. So why are you guys so stressed about this instead of the police state, which is winning? You guys see what I'm doing? The Slow News Day don't understand this. But the police state, and this is why I want you guys to understand, the police state as we know it right now is winning. But on Revolutionary Blackout, I cover the police state in the insane propaganda every day, every stream. Where is the coverage? I've been looking. You guys do not. No one covers the police state like we do. Every single day they come out with a propaganda piece against defund the police. But you guys love talking about the truck convoy, but nothing about the police state. Do you guys see the frustration I have? Every day we are losing. They're funding the police more. They were dropping mandates. You guys see the difference? And there's no solidarity with the populist right, who they now find their balls to complain about the police state because it's going against them. But our people are dying, and then they cheer it on. And you guys are happy to work with these people? I'm skeptical. That's why I say I support 2 out of 3. I support the ask, and I support the tactics. But when it comes to the people, I am very skeptical of working with like these capitalists and the police state supporters. Because the right wingers that you see upset at this police violence, you guys got to ask yourself this question. Are they upset at this police violence, or are they mad at who's being turned at? Because I promise you, a lot of these right wingers that are supporting this protest, they'd be more than happy to turn this on us. They'd be more than happy to turn this on the workers. Like a lot of anti-union people that are in charge of this convoy does. That's my criticism of the people. And I think we need to be loud about it because we are losing the battle against the police state. Meanwhile, there's so many people on the left that don't even talk about this shit. And this is mostly a criticism of the boutique left, where they side with the police state. Sam Cedar say he doesn't care, right? But as a black leftist, I am disheartened right now. Mm-hmm. I am in a place of dismay. If you're on the side of the trucker convoy and you fight against mandates, you should be optimistic. Everyone's on your side. Who's on our side? That's my question. And I'm not going to show solidarity to any movement unless I get solidarity from my people. And that was Slow New Day need to understand. That's my position.
Yeah, anyone wants to respond to that?
No, I mean, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say the surveillance state is the police state. So when you see the people talking against the surveillance state, they're talking against the police state because the surveillance state controls the police state. Cops are, and I understand where you're coming from. I do, because there's a lot of hypocrisy on the right. And mm-hmm. I've seen it. I've seen the same people that are, are like Tucker's an example, but there are plenty of others that they equate it to Black Lives Matter. They're saying, oh, if Trump did this and blah, blah, blah. But that's the problem. That's right there is the issue. We cannot allow ourselves to play into those games because we have to be consistent in both. I'm consistent in the fact that I'm against the police state, period, whether it's a Black Lives Matter protester, and I tend to agree with that ideology more than if it's a right-winger protesting for whatever it is, even if I don't agree with their ideology, if I agree with what they're talking about. Now, I think there's a difference in coverage. Perhaps maybe Steve, he looks at the surveillance state, and I don't want to speak for him, but he looks at the surveillance state as the bigger police state because the surveillance state is in control of the police state. Who gives the orders for cops to do what they do? Who puts these politicians in play? These politicians really are puppets. They serve very little power. So it's the national security state. You said it, Nick. It's the national security state that is really our enemy. And it's the national security state that's really in control, that is really putting up this whole allowing the cops to act the way they are, especially in the United States when our cops are trained by the military, that like Israeli military. I mean, like this. The squad just voted to give more money to the Capitol Police, and they used January 6th. They used January 6th as painting these people as all a bunch of white supremacist insurrectionists to do that, and the left cheered for it. That's my whole point. It's like they are using our differences between the populist right, and if that is even a thing, and then the left, to foment us to fight each other instead of the surveillance state, which if we can tackle the surveillance state, forget the fucking police. The police take orders. They're literal they're just like they're
Stormtroopers.
Yeah, stormtroopers. That's exactly what I was looking for. And that's all they are. And when I was covering these protests, sometimes it's like, people wanted to take over the police station, and and they really wanted to do that, and other people were like, no, let's not take over the police station. And there's different strategies and tactics, but what really will get us closer to getting rid of the police state is getting rid of the surveillance state. And I do think that sometimes, in an effort to really really look at the bigger picture, some people don't talk about how how Black voices aren't heard, and how there is a lot of hypocrisy. And I think it's okay to mention that. And I think you're dignified in your anger, and in your reasons of being suspect are understandable 100%. But that's kind of what they want. They want us to be suspect of coming together. And I don't think anybody is advocating for you or anybody that's uncomfortable to come wrap arms with a white supremacist. That's not what most people are advocating. They're saying that most people who are your neighbors are not the enemy, even if they're ignorant. And how better to inform these people of their ignorance than to actually go talk to them. I've seen Glory do it. She goes to these Trumpers and starts talking to them about Julian Assange, and starts kind of, they know that she's not with them, but she also does that. And I'm not going to tell Glory, because she is, a multiracial, a biracial young woman, whether she should or she shouldn't talk to these people. That's not my place. If you're comfortable and if you're willing to do that, do it. But I am never going to tell people who are uncomfortable to not to do that if they don't want to. But I think there is a conversation worth to be had. I think when we talk about what Fred Hampton did and how he united so many people, I think that's something that I know you guys were inspired about. And I think it's important to have that. And I really appreciate this conversation, because it really points out some of the things that everybody is missing. And I get it. I get where you're
I think it's important.
You mind if I jump in? Because I got to say something real quick. I do want to round this conversation out with this, because I feel like I'm being intellectually consistent, because I railed against the people like earlier on in this live stream who just mirrored this entire movement as a group of white supremacists. Now, the reason why they do this, they are being dishonest, and I've been calling them out for days now. Can you guys at least be honest? You guys smear them as white supremacists because you don't support the ask. The leftists who support the ask, they're the people that are saying, oh, not all of them are white supremacists. They may have some bad people, but you can't define a movement by a small group of people, which everyone knows. Everyone knows that. But the people who don't support the ask, since they don't have a strong mandate, argument for mandates, we all agree to that, right? They got to use other tactics like smear them as white supremacists, and I don't agree with that. And even if there are people who I disagree with that movement, if we have an ask that I agree with, I am willing to work with them on that ask. This is what I'm consistent on. But at the same time, that's why I'm willing to criticize and break the cognitive dissonance. Now, this is the part that frustrates me with the liberals and the neo-progressives, the Justice Democrats, and this shows their hypocrisy, right? And I think this is important to bring up. They smear everyone who the part of the convoy as white supremacists. They smear the people who are supporting the convoy as white supremacists. Meanwhile, they're voting for Joe Biden. So you guys see how that drives me crazy too? Like, you either have a zero stance policy on white supremacy or you don't. I'm one of the people, I'm like, man, I really don't give a fuck what you think, as long as you're helping me out in my task, right? So that's why I wanted to work with even people who vote for Joe Biden on certain things. Now, if I had a zero stance policy on white supremacy, like a lot of these people pretend they do, I would say, yo, I'm not working with anyone who votes for Joe Biden. Dead ass. Like, if you vote for the Democratic Party, I'm not working with you. But you see, I don't have that stance because I'm consistent. I'm willing to work with some right wingers on the tasks I agree with, but I'm also willing to work with shit libs on tasks I agree with. That's the consistent position. But anyway, I'm gonna pass back to the panel. I just want to add that part.
I'll say real quick.
I'm frustrated with both I'm frustrated with the people who smear at the convoy as white supremacists, but none of my criticism really applies to like leftists. Like it like doesn't really apply to you. Like it applies to like the neo progressives. It applies to like the liberals who are hypocritical about white supremacy. It applies more to the right wingers who are hypocritical about authoritarianism. But I want to get Glory back in here because I think you about to say something.
Yeah, I'll say to Fee's point as well. I think part of the narrative of people wanting to divide us as well is they want people to be talking about the big personalities that are discussing this whole thing. There's a reason why, whenever Black Lives Matter protests happen, you never get to see the people on the ground. You never get to see what actual people are saying. You never get to hear from people who join the protests from bars or from the streets or from their homes. You see the same co-opted organizers, and you see the same pundits that are hyper partisan, or you see the same exact astroturfers every time. And that's the case with this movement as well. You're going to see people like Tucker Carlson or Jack Posobiec or Sam Cedar getting uplifted, or their opinions getting the most coverage in this movement, as opposed to what people on the ground are saying. I mean, there are streamers out there that like Auto Walks, for instance, instead of like Ottawa, it's Auto Walks, like walks at the end. And yeah, like there are people that just go around and walk through this protest, and all you see is like, you see a couple of Canadian flags, and then you see chants of peace and love, and you see normal people. I mean, one of the things that Cory Morningstar does is she tells people, the individuals that are there. Like one of the things she'll say is like, oh, Kevin's here, he smells like diesel, he's aiding in mutual aid efforts right now. Or I'm here with California nurses, and they're providing showers for everyone here. Or I'm here with so and so, he's a fuel runner. And those are the people that are getting completely missed. And I don't think those people are going to be hypocrites about something like police brutality. Those people aren't going to say, oh, I hope that I wouldn't bat an eye at the same thing that happened to me happened to a Black Lives Matter protester. Those people are just normal working class people, and they're in numbers at these movements. A lot of the people that were holding the lines yesterday, they were just moms. I mean, one of the picture had our friend Cory Morningstar in there. And that's one of the things that focusing on so much pundits and right left narratives distracts from, is it goes away from the fact that really a large number of these people are just average working class people. And do some of them hold right-wing views? Absolutely. Do some of them hold left-wing views? Absolutely. But that's the beauty of a movement. That's the beauty of a cause that can unite people across partisan lines. That's the beauty of a cause that's grounded in something like human rights and bodily autonomy, and trying to stop a pervasive surveillance state from being ushered in. It unites people across party lines, and it brings in normal people. It brings in family people. It brings in working class people. It brings in a lot of first-time protesters. That's one of the things that I've noticed a lot with this anti-mandate movement being on the ground, is a lot of the people there are first-time protests. And I think that's something that gets so lost in all this, in a lot of discussions of right and left narratives, especially as it pertains to America.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Gloria is saying. And I've been actually reaching out to a lot of my family who live in Canada to kind of ask their opinions about what's going on there. And like my more liberal minded family has, definitely kind of used a lot of those talking points, like, oh, they're basically just Trumpers, or, oh, like they're just being disruptive and all this stuff. But then I talked to like my more conservative cousins who live out west, and we've been able to have like very nuanced conversations about the vaccine and about the truckers. And they even, like, I asked them very directly, like, so how do you feel about the fact that these leaders are they were involved with like PPC and Wexit, and they told me, like, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of skepticism about that, but mostly they see it as a bit of a distraction. And I think that's definitely how maybe we should view it as well. It's like, I definitely agree with Nick that anyone who is involved with this and wouldn't have the same moral consistency about police brutality, like, they are hypocrites, and we should definitely call that shit out. I agree with Nick 100% on that. but we should not paint everyone involved as a white supremacist, because obviously that's not true. And we should be morally consistent on saying, like, no, police brutality, this what's happening right now is fucked. This is not okay. We should not be agreeing with this kind of authoritarian behavior. This is nonsense. And the fact that I can have a conversation like that with my more conservative cousins and have that kind of moral consistency, that's saying something to me when I can't agree with that with my more liberal family members.
And that's why we should be driving the discussion that way. And that's
Mhm.
why, like, what I'm doing is not being divisive. We're supposed to be steering the direction in the right way, right? Because I'll
Mhm.
mention to people, then like, okay, you're supposed to have a conversation with the people so the movement go in the right direction. That's what I'm doing.
Mhm.
If I call you out for your hypocrisy on the police state, I'm not being divisive. You're being divisive if you still support the police state. If you support the police state and you support this movement, and I call out your hypocrisy, your response should be, "Oh, damn, that's right. I didn't see it that way." If you're like, "No, I still support civil asset forfeiture," am I being the divisive one? That's the question I got. That's the question I got to ask. We got to keep revolutionary discipline on the movement to prevent it from being hijacked. So what Gloria and Fiorella, what Meg has been saying is correct. That's why I hate when people smear this movement as white supremacists, because there's no doubt in my mind that there are a lot of great people. I know a lot of them that support this movement, but we can't allow the capitalist class to hijack this movement peacefully. Because you think they're not going to do that? Like, historically, they're gonna do that. So are we gonna just allow them to do that because we don't want confrontation? Because we want this false peace? We just want love and hugs to go around, so we're not gonna call out any cognitive dissonance? That's the same unity bullshit that progressives pull. So that's the question I want to ask. If you upset at me because I'm calling out the hypocrisy of this movement, why is that controversial? But if I call out progressives when they say the right thing, that's okay. I'm doing the same thing. Just because we agree on mandates don't mean I'm gonna let you off on inconsistencies, and that's needed in a movement. That what Lenin did. That what Malcolm X did when he challenged MLK. Successful movements are done by challenging each other to make sure the movement go in the right direction. As I see it right now, I just see a bunch of kumbaya. To be honest, that's literally what I see. And I'm like, damn, the left is just gonna go with this. So I see some of you guys a little upset, but these are conversations that has to be had, and it makes people who are uncritically supportive of this convoy uncomfortable because it should. It should. That feeling that you want unity. That's the same reflex that progressives have when I criticize the squad. I'm just letting you guys. I'm just letting people know. So that's the last thing I want to say in terms of that, and what you guys are saying exactly why we got to keep this movement honest. The same way I just did a segment exposing Black Lives Matter. Literally just did it, released on my channel. You guys don't think I'm just mad at this movement? No, we got to have revolutionary discipline because in the Western Hemisphere, at least in the North America, we have not, right? But anyway, that's the last thing I want to say.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people there, though, who are at the protest, are seeing that the police aren't on their side. Like, I don't think that some of the protesters there are going to be supporting the police state if, I mean, they're seeing that the police are not supporting their movement and cracking down at them as we're seeing right here.
Well, I mean, I want to push back on that for just a second, because I mean, let's be real. That I mean, Canada is more homogenous than the United States is. But I don't know how, and honestly, I don't know how they would feel about if there was a BLM protest happening in Ottawa. You know, I do think that there would be. I mean, I don't know that. I won't. I'm not gonna make any kind of arguments that say that they would be against a BLM argument. I have no idea. I cannot make that type of speculation. But I do agree with what Nick is saying, is that we can't be uncritical of what's happening, is because, especially considering this is a largely homogenous white population in Canada. Like, obviously there are, you know, black people who are involved in these protests, or, you know, indigenous people who are involved in these protests, and immigrants and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to erase them from this conversation at all. But I do agree with what Nick is saying, is that we can't be uncritical about what's happening and how, and the attention that's being put on this protest, as opposed to a BLM protest, or even like people being arrested or killed, like indigenous people being killed while protesting, you know, at Standing Rock. You know, we do have to be morally consistent about it. And Are they going to be standing up for indigenous people, going, protesting environmental regulations? Like, are they going to be standing with them just as much as we're here standing with the people who are protesting the vaccine mandates?
I have to push back on that because the BLM protests were covered all over mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was that they were covered in the wrong way. They
Agreed.
were covered like what Glory said, with just, they would show like quote unquote looting and a bunch
Agreed.
of people like breaking into stores. The right would show that, which would, be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. They're breaking all this property. And then, the left would come in and be like, yeah, well, property breaking is good. And then you'd have the nuanced side, the side of the people. When I went to Kenosha, and I talked to somebody that lost a small business because they trash whoever it was, right? Because the news makes it seem like, oh, it's just the BLM protesters, it's Antifa, blah, blah, blah. But really, you don't know who did it, and you don't know what their tactics were. I've seen agent provocateurs all over the place.
Yes.
So I'm not saying it is BLM, but in the same way, I know there are agent provocateurs, and I've been witness to them, and I've
totally agreed on that. Yeah, there's a lot of infiltrators.
I'm sorry, real quick. It's not Roberta Paulson. I just wanted to confirm. I was looking through this morning. One of that woman's relatives on Facebook said that she was not actually dead, but her shoulder was injured. I think it was dislocated, but it was injured. But she's recovering, thank goodness. So she's not dead. And Roberta Paulson is a Fight Club character, so that's a bit of a psyop there. I also I think they called her Aunt Candy, and she was in the Mohawk Nation, I believe. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just wanted to clear that up as you were scrolling by it.
Okay.
So so the same thing is happening with these protests like right now going on in Ottawa, and I think like that's the problem. And what we're hearing is like the bad, and like so these protests I think are being covered in the mainstream only to trash on them. I haven't seen anything positive from the mainstream media, either from Canada or from the United States, about the protests. So I don't really care about how much coverage these protests are getting. Like, to me, they were getting, a lot of coverage in the mainstream, but they're being like they're not being framed right. They're being dishonestly framed, just the same way that the BLM protests were framed in a very negative way towards the protesters, naming the protesters as all rioters, looters, and all of these things, completely dismissing that. And one of the things, to Nick's point about the hypocrisy about a lot of the right discovering authoritarianism in 2020, the left-right paradigm has shifted so much that there's always a switch. There's always a switch happening throughout decades. And when we were at the January 6th and we were asking people about why they were there and all this stuff, later on when things got really hefty and people were trying to get into the Capitol, they were shouting at the police and they were saying, "Blue, why are you doing this? We backed you, Blue." And like we were like, "We told you they're not your friends. Welcome to our world." Or when they were contesting the election for Donald Trump and they were talking about how elections and blah, 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 we're like, you guys didn't say anything when it was Bernie Sanders who got cheated. And they were like, yeah, we should have said something. I think there's a realization too on a lot of the right. And I think the reason they're looking more at the state is because they have been suspect of the state a lot longer in terms of the whole big government situation. But I think on the left, the opposite has happened, where they started, because of Trump derangement syndrome and because of COVID, they started looking at their neighbors more as the important like villain instead of the state. And so I think that's something that is worthy criticism of the left. Like it's always going to be the surveillance state, which empowers the police state, which is what we have to go after. And I think, when there's fair criticism, and I think there's a lot of hypocrisy on both ends. The liberals have hypocrisy, the right has hypocrisy. When, for instance, you're talking about my body, my choice, and you're a liberal and you're pro-choice and you're for vaccine mandates, I think you're a hypocrite. Same as I think when you're a right-winger and you say my body, my choice, and then you're not for a woman's right to choose, I think you're a fucking hypocrite. And that hypocrisy is there. We're not going to necessarily eliminate certain people from going along that hypocrisy, but what we have to do is bring people in to show them that is wrong and it's dividing us, and not to think through those those culture wars. I think that's what we really would. You have to sift through this whole mess, and it's really messy for us because we're fighting a battle on different fronts. We're fighting, the liberals. We're fighting the actual right. We're fighting the authoritarian state. We're fighting so many things, and so it gets lost in the process.
Being nonpartisan in this whole thing is like a whole headache in and of itself, because everywhere I go on the ground, it's like I show up at one protest and it's like, oh, don't talk to her, she's Antifa. I'm like, I'm not Antifa. Oh my God, you're such a Nazi collaborator, right winger. I'm not that either. Oh my God, like, what are you? And it's like, I'm just an independent Jamaican American woman, and I'm trying to fight against the global tyranny. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah, I get smeared as a right winger. I get smeared as a crazy Antifa. Like, it depends on who you're talking to. Like, if I'm exposing liberal hypocrisy, I'm a Nazgul. If I'm exposing the hypocrisy on the right, I'm a fucking shit lib, whatever. That's just how it is when you don't accept the bullshit label. So it is what it is.
yeah. For me, definitely inconsistency is really frustrating. Uh, but when it comes to like the principles that I have, I'm still gonna stand by BLM protesters. Not all of them are gonna be anti-mandate, but I will stand in solidarity with everybody who's anti-mandate. Who not everybody there is going to be BLM, but I will do everything I can to inform as many people as I can about how all these issues are connected with each other. So, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
fuck yeah. I mean, that's where you start with this whole thing. That's where you start. You start with knowledge. You start with the truth. That's one of the easiest ways that you can empower people, that you can give people any sort of agency or sovereignty in a world where freedom is being so critically threatened, where we're being so enslaved, going into the future as well, mentally and physically. I mean, it's just so important to do whatever you can to continue these conversations and spread information. And that's why I do the kind of shit that like Fiorella was bringing up earlier. That's why I'll talk to anybody about Julian Assange. That's why I'll talk to like anybody about anything, because like it's spreading the truth by any means necessary. And like obviously it fails. Okay, I'm aware of how I look. I'm aware of how I dress at these events. Like I'm aware that people have these preconceived notions about me based off of how I look that are gonna lead them to be that are gonna lead it to be a shit conversation. But either way, you need to do it. You need to have it, because if we're not trying to have some sort of like I don't want to call it a cultural revolution, but like some sort of revolution of values, some sort of like, I don't want to call it an enlightenment either, but like some sort of enlightenment, some sort of change of thought that can get people to understand what their true history is, that can get people to understand how to divest from and fight an empire, that can get people to understand the ways in which they're being enslaved now and the ways in which the empire is trying to enslave them in the future, and get people to understand like how they can be empowered by this information going into the future. I think something like that is so critical, and it's how we can get out of this and continue to move forward and continue to prosper in the face of all this adversity, in the face of all these losses, in the face of such a massive national security state and an expanding state of surveillance capitalism. I think spreading information like that, spreading the truth like that, is just so fucking important. And shout out Rob Judo, who's in the chat. I just noticed he came in. Everybody's favorite wizard. What's up, Rob?
Yeah, long-time supporter of our shows, for sure. Thank you, Rob.
Always got to shout him out when he comes in.
Yeah, I've been very critical of this new psyop that has been aggressive and extremely successful, if we're gonna be honest, of the new divide and conquer. Obviously, you got both parties that represent corporate America, so you got to get people fighting on culture war issues, because now economics is completely off the table, and it's kind of crazy to watch people fall for this. Like I've been smeared, and I see Fiorella been smeared for this as well. Like you get the boutique left, they'll smear us as red brown just because we love our neighbors and we want to talk to our neighbors. That's it. That's literally where the smear comes from, because we say I'm willing to talk to people I disagree with, because personally I'm confident I can get people on their side. I know it hurts to hear, But most people, at least the people I'm interested on bringing aboard, are well intentioned. Even if they have these hypocrisies that I'm talking about, most people are not engaged in the constant Twitter culture war where they can't admit where they're wrong. So when my experience talking to conservatives, when I bring up these hypocrisies I've been bringing up these streams, they be like, damn, like normal people. I'm not talking about the Ben Shapiro's, like the average person. They be like, damn, that's a good point, Nick. Then you may not get convince them, but you can start edging them. That's why I bring that up. That's why you got to talk to your neighbors, and that's why I strongly dislike the liberal class, which includes the progressives now. That one, like, we can't show no love. You can't talk to anyone in this protest. They all white supremacists. You can't talk to anyone you disagree with or your red brown lines. And I have been on the front line speaking out against that because that is so harmful for working class movement. So throughout the course of the stream, I've been I've been talking about my criticism of this, but I want to talk about the hypocrisies and bring these people aboard, build solidarity using these conversations. But I think that's something important, and that psyop honestly has been very successful because now people don't even want to talk to their neighbors. They instead of blaming the wrong cloud, a lot of people blame the unvaxxed. That's just the reality. And I was on Jimmy's show live, and I was saying I refuse that tactic. I'm not gonna blame people if they take ivermectin, for example. I'm gonna blame the ruling class for not providing them health care. So I really wish people would take that mindset. But honestly, the establishment has been successful at dividing people. If I'm gonna call it ball and stripes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Nick. And I think definitely, Gloria, I think what you were trying to get to is definitely consciousness raising. I definitely think we need to be raising a lot of consciousness about like what exactly is happening when it comes to these mandates and about the surveillance state and the police state, and making sure that people are awake to these things, because once they're awake, we can start organizing. We need to be waking people up. Like we need, like I said, I was able to have conversations with my conservative cousins about these vaccine mandates. I wasn't able to have with my liberal family members, and I think that's definitely showing something, like that shift that's happening, particularly with the liberal class. Especially with the PMC class and everything. Like we're seeing that shift towards being less open to free speech, being less open to talking to people. And I'm not gonna. I don't want to be involved in that stuff. Like I don't want to police people's speech. Like because once you police people's speech, like what's to stop them from coming after you? What's to stop them when you all of a sudden decide to feel some way that is going against the mainstream narrative? Like what's to stop them from cracking down on you? So I am not going to stand for anything that is anti-free speech. I will support these truckers' right to say whatever the hell they want to say, and to be disruptive and be out in the streets, feeling how they want to feel, protesting, practicing their right to free speech without being called terrorists. Protest is not terrorism. I don't feel the same way about BLM, and like even when they were calling it riots, like this is a protest. Like, no, is anybody getting killed besides a lot of BLM people? Like, no, I'm not. Like, I see a lot of in a police state. I'm not seeing like BLM people killing each other in riots. Like, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing a lot of people getting injured or being arrested or being pulled into white vans by police. I'm seeing a lot of that. But like, I completely agree with what y'all are saying. Is that we need to stop fighting each other and start coming together to fight the police state and fighting, the empire, as Gloria was saying. And we're not going to be able to do that if we're not engaged in consciousness raising. That's not going to happen. We all need to be involved in that stuff. We all need to be as open to as much free speech. Like the only thing that can get rid of bad speech is good speech. We need to be fighting back, and you can't do that unless you have free speech. You just can't. So unless these liberals want their speech cracked down too, we've got to stop this shit. Like, Joe Rogan is not your fucking problem. Joe Rogan's not your problem. It's the state. It's the state. So get your shit together and actually fight the people who actually have power. Because guess what? There's a reason why Joe Rogan has the audience he does. There's a reason people trust him, why they trust, a lot of these right-wing speakers. There's a reason they trust them and they don't trust you. There's a reason. Because guess what? That all they hear from mainstream media is a bunch of lies, and you are parroting those same lies.
So there's a situation that's happening, and the intelligence community is really good at doing what they do. They have turned the right into understanding. The right sees the problem. When you talk to a right winger, as you guys have said, you can find some agreeing on them because they understand that there are problems. I've talked to many of them and they're like, yes, this is a problem. The problem is they blame the wrong people. So they blame, like, let's say, oh, like these people are lazy, they're not working hard enough, or they blame communism and they equate communism to fascism. Well, when a Twitter commie comes in and they're pretty much saying that everybody is a white supremacist and everybody is a Nazi, that's reinforcing their already existing belief. So that is going to, their belief in that is going to grow, and they're going to associate communism with fascism. It was awful seeing, like seeing so many it was great seeing so many leftists and so many independent and people who watch my show at the no mandates protest, or defeat the mandates protest in DC. But it was also like, you could tell there was a few right wingers there, and there was a flag that said no to communism. Right. And that really, like, I'm like, God damn it. We have to, like, I have to, like, it's almost like it's so hard because you have to explain to people that this isn't communism, that this is fascism. And you're right that this is authoritarian. You're right that this is, this is not about health. This is about control. But you're blaming the wrong thing. And so in order to say that, we have to be smarter than the intelligence community. We can't act like what they've painted us at. And this is why I hate the neo-progressives and the AOCs and those people, because they're pushing people to the right. They're pushing people into the arms of the right. They're pushing people to say, well, I'm going to vote Republican because I don't want anything to do with these people, because that's left. That is what we know as the U.S. left. Those people, unfortunately, are what is known as the U.S. left. Because when I was in Nicaragua, it was like, wow, there is no left in America. Most people, they were like, there's no left in America. You guys call that left? That's not left. And so we don't count because there's so few of us that have this ability to have nuance and have these discussions. And it's really obnoxious, and it really infuriates me when we have to fight all of those battles. And that's what I'm saying. Well, I agree with all of you that this is all connected, every single thing. And one of the things that I, came into understanding very well due to my Free Assange comrades was the fact that free speech is really a huge issue when it comes to fighting for every other protest. If you want to fight for Medicare for all, you want to fight for better wages, you want to fight for everything. If we live in a fascist state where we can't have dissent, where we can't protest, then we don't have the ability to fight for that. And I think that's a lot where the connection is to a lot of these trucker convoy protesters, is if they don't have the autonomy to really do to put something in their body, to really decide what they want, and if they don't have the ability to protest, to have dissent, then what else are you going to fight for? And I think we can, when we talk to people about what else are you guys fighting for, it has to come from a place of understanding, not a place of like the liberals come at it. That's why it's so hard to talk to a liberal, because they come at it with elitism, with arrogance, like they know better. And unfortunately, a lot of the progressive left, or the like pseudo communist left, because that's not real communism, I swear, like it really isn't. And so that's what they come at it as. If you don't read theory, well, go back and sit down because I don't want to talk to you. And
you're
and
supposed
that
to
is not
educate
what
people.
that's not how we should be. You have to understand that people are working so hard. People are going through a really hard time right now, and you can't come at people with this elitism. And that's why a lot of people left the Democratic Party and Donald Trump and went to Donald Trump, because they saw him as an outsider. And we just keep repeating the same mistake. You're never going to get people on your side when you act like an arrogant prick. And we need to fight that and show people that everything is connected.
You need to approach people where they are, and that's where getting on the ground and supporting their cause comes so important. I mean, being able to empathize them on this level of not even just what the mandates are doing to livelihoods, but what the lockdowns have done, what social distancing has done, what the mask mandates have done. I mean, the vast amount of, like, the explosion of microplastic pollution in the environment that occurred because of ineffective waste management of masks, of surgical masks, of cloth masks, of all of those. The absolute kick with the spiked boot in the nuts that happened to people's mental health because of these lockdowns. I mean, there were so many people that just suffered mentally because of the fact that they, had to go remote, that they had to limit their human contact. It's having real and tangible effects on people. So being able to empathize with that is just one of the easiest ways to approach people where they at, not coming at it from a perspective of wanting to gatekeep or wanting to trivialize their struggles, considering it like, oh, you don't agree with me on everything, or, oh, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I'm going to try and lecture you, or, oh, I don't agree with your tactics. Like, I think you're a Karen. I think this is boring. I think you're too right wing or whatever. You have to be able to approach people what they are, because so many of these people protesting at these truckers are just normal people. They're working class people. They're family people. They're first time protesters, like I was saying earlier. And so the easiest way to approach people and to inform them is just come at them, empathize with them, approach them where they are. And sometimes it does have to involve shedding a bit of your own ideological biases, and sometimes it does involve like approaching people with a bit more humility than you're used to. But at the end of the day, I at least think that it has to be done, and certainly for fucking sure not enough people are doing it. So
Yeah, that
You can tell.
I agree with that.
that understanding is part of that growing consciousness, right? I think we really need a conscious revolution before, if we're going to be successful at any other kind of revolution. We really need to have that level of understanding where people are coming from, and not labeling and attacking people for not agreeing with you 100% on everything because they come from different paths of life. Because if you're going to be doing that, like Mike Preisner, for example, saying that I'm killing people when I'm just showing objective information, objective evidence, and all that.
Franco, you mean Mike Preisner and Jabby Martin?
Mike
sorry.
Pfizer.
I'm sorry.
But no, with all serious,
For anyone else but me.
but really though, like if we're gonna be doing that, like being so reactionary like that, you're gonna have such a small circle. You're trying to bring people in and educate them and have an understanding, and then eventually, like when you just have your circle, you're gonna be micro criticizing them too. And I've seen that happen. People micro criticizing each other, and then their circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean, who do you have?
Yeah.
You have all this information, but you're not open to seeing where you may be wrong. You're not understanding
They
on
don't
where.
care about winning.
Yeah, it's
No,
just
that wasn't-
your
Those are
care
people-
about being right and morally superior. It shouldn't be about being moral superiority. It should be about what is objectively the best thing to do, and understanding where other people come from and dealing with people with compassion. That is a conscious revolution if we all start doing that.
Yeah, I think you
Yeah,
got
go
that
ahead,
word
Nick.
right there, Franco. Is that
And
is
then-
compassion. Compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's
and-
definitely
and-
the key.
And you can tell that a lot of the people who push the divisive rhetoric, they really don't talk to workers at all. Because when you hear their cartoonish demonization of people who disagree with them, when I would just mention, like I'll talk to conservatives on flip all the time. People's like, "What? That's impossible." Because I sold cars in Kansas. I mean, you talk to these people and you realize that Ben Shapiro is the outlier, and then you realize like, yeah, they get a lot of views, but that's still a small percentage of the population. But there's so many people who they're so online and they never really talk to people. They don't know this. So they see anyone else who advocate talking to someone else, they see that as insane and crazy and as a waste of time, not knowing there are a lot of people you can easily convince if you had enough practice talking to people. We held the Jones Strike Summit. We had a union strike leader. He was the Michigan strike leader for Kellogg, and he was on our show and endorsed the idea that was called Red, Brown, and Lines. He said you should work with people you had agreements with if you agree on a task. This is coming from a union leader that's saying this. But some people will smear him as, oh, you just want to support the right wing. You want to believe in Red, Brown. See, this is the stuff we got to continue to fight back against.
Yeah.
No, 100%, Nick. Like, I want to kind of continue working on the whole idea of like compassion and being able, like, listening to actual people's stories, listening to where they're actually coming from. It's like I can listen to, my cousin's talking about like not wanting to get the vaccine because she was afraid of because she had just gotten pregnant and she wasn't sure how the vaccine would affect her pregnancy when it affected her daughter. She wasn't sure. Watching another cousin, she caught COVID while on cancer treatment. She had to give up her cancer treatment for a COVID treatment, and she died. Listening to those stories, listening to how the vaccine has affected people, listening to how, just listening to people, whether you agree with them or not, having compassion for what they experience, not having some kind of paternalistic, elitist mindset of like, oh, well, I am for vaccine mandates, so you are automatically wrong. I am for this policy, so you are absolutely wrong. It doesn't matter what your experience was. Like, that is so diminishing. It's dismissive. Like, and I don't have time for that shit. I don't have time for that. And I've experienced that myself. And I had to mute people. I've had to unfollow people who I considered comrades. Because I don't have time for that kind of nonsense. And this is one of the reasons why I honestly feel like the conversation around vaccine mandates may be the thing that divides the left the most. That's the thing that's going to break the left.
I think it exposes people because there are people that used to support Medicare for all. The same people that support Medicare for all, like, yeah, if you're unvaccinated, we shouldn't give you health care. Now, if that's your opinion, we're not anywhere near on the same time, on the same side. So it's not dividing the left; it's just exposing the people.
Oh, you don't get you don't get the vaccine, you shouldn't have sick leave. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah,
I think people support Bernie that say shit like that. Like, if you, I don't care what you say you support. If you believe that, we not on the same side. Like, just period.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, do you guys have any closing remarks here? What final messages you want to leave the audience?
I can say this because this is regard. I wanted to say this earlier, but I kind of forgot the point. But I'll mention it here because you guys are talking to conservatives. And I got started as a citizen journalist because I quit my job. I was canvassing for Bernie at the time, and I was canvassing in South Carolina, one of the conservative states. I was talking to rednecks. I was against people who were yelling at us for being socialists. Like, guys, I had a lot of conversations with conservatives, successful and not. The best thing you can do, try to peel them away from culture war issues, because that's all they really have. Once you peel past the culture war issues, you will see all the regular, like, non-Ben Shapiro subscribers. Like, you're gonna have a hard time reaching those people. But the person that like probably vote Republican because their family did, maybe because they come from more religious background, so they nationally lean conservative, but they have questions. They will like, y'all don't like corruption. Okay, hammer corruption. They think a lot of I think workers should be paid more. Well, hammer that. They don't like your frame socialism. They don't like your framing communism. But oftentimes, and this is kind of what Fiorella talking about, when they demonize communism, they mostly talking about capitalism. And then you can just bring up, this is what's going on in our system right now. This thing you think is communism is going on right now. You want to fix that? Yes. Bam. You got something you agree with right there. Right? They would say, oh, communism is authoritarianism. Okay, do you believe in legalizing marijuana, which is authoritarian practice? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, you got a thread of commonality. Work from there. Find threads of commonality. Avoid the culture war. And you can do it. I had lots of success. And people who are not successful with are people who are too engaged in the culture war. Right? So that's the last thing I want to say on that topic. Don't be afraid to talk to your neighbors. And we've been openly rejecting, and this is something that we've been pumping out consistently, reject the psyop of hating your neighbors. From day one, that's the most important thing I can say to you guys right now, because they know that class consciousness is increasing. They know people are getting fed up, so they got to divide people so they don't challenge late-stage capitalism. That last thing I gotta say. Thanks for inviting me on, Franco.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for coming on. Who else wants to give their closing remarks? Let's go with Fiorella.
God, I thought somebody else was wanting to go. I mean, everything has pretty much been said. I think, this was a good conversation to have. I think more people should have these type of conversations, Franco. So thank you for always hosting this. And I think it's better to have this conversation here than on Twitter, because Twitter doesn't allow for these discussions to really play out in the right way, and people get angry and passionate, and then they just use the block button, which has been happening a lot with people who don't want to listen to what's really happening right now. So I think we really have to fight against this massive surveillance state, which encapsulates the police state, which encapsulates the systemic issues that we have. And I think it's becoming difficult as we become divided. And so we have to really fight back against that division and really come together as working people against this state. And I think right now, the left right paradigm in that instance to me is, even though I consider myself a staunch leftist, is really getting in the way of things. So for me, it's us against the 1%, the predator class, this ruling global class that is attempting to really take control of everything. And I am glad to be having these conversations with all of you.
All right. What's next, Meg?
Sure. I mean, I agree with Fiorella. Like, I think we've basically said everything that there is to say. And I agree that, we do just have to work as best as we can to kind of cross in these divisions and really try to heal and come back together. Like, we're going to have differences. We're not going to agree on every little thing. If we did that, I think that'd be a problem. Like, because there should still be some kind of individuality. Like, we're different people. But yeah, we're going to disagree, but we have to find a way to have more of these discussions, and that way we can really get to the heart of what those disagreements are and come back together around, okay, well, what can we actually agree upon? Okay, then let's work from there. And I feel like the consciousness raising is so important, and then we need to be doing more of it about what exactly is happening, and understand that in order for the ruling class to be, there will always be an underclass. And as the underclass, we need to be coming together and fighting back against the ruling class, and teaching people that, as the underclass, like, you are being exploited, you're being oppressed. You may not see it that way, but let me explain how that is. And understanding, yeah, we need to come together because we all have that boot on our neck. We might have a different boot on our neck. Like, some of us may have, police brutality. Some of us may have gender or sexuality or whatever, but there's still a boot there. It may be a different boot, but there's still a boot. And we need to be able to take all those collective boots and throw them aside and understand we're all human beings. We need to be fighting for one another. And that's basically what it comes down to, is our common humanity. Like, that's one of the reasons I'm a humanist, is because I believe in a common humanity, and that we need to be coming together to fight for that and fighting for our human rights. So I'll go ahead and leave it there. But thank you, Franco, for having this conversation. I think it was really an amazing conversation.
For sure. Yeah. Well said, Meg. Glory.
Yeah, I mean, Jean-Luc Brunel is dead. Yeah, that dropped recently. Thought I'd put that out there in the big news of playbooks that keep happening in global elite trafficking rings. But yeah, other than that, besides that tangent, I mean, a very wise and beautiful incarcerated man once said, there's unity in the oppression, so there must be absolute unity and determination in the response. That quote came from one Julian Assange, and I think we should live by it. I think, put aside all the partisan nonsense and unite and fucking take back our freedom and liberate ourselves. I think that's pretty straightforward in and of itself, and I hope that this was the case, but I believe in the panel that we've outlined some ways to do that in terms of being able to approach people where they are and get people to see the bigger picture in a lot of these causes. As it is, I think we're all fighting for some form of liberation because, like Meg pointed out, there's some boot on our necks. Whichever way you want to look at it, there is a boot on our necks. There is some form of enslavement happening. So it's critical that we fight against that because it's simply in human nature to resist that. And kokoro wo moyase, set your heart ablaze.
Yeah, well said, everybody. Thank you guys so much for being respectful. It is also the conscious thing to do to remove that boot from your neck so that more harm is not caused, because then they're going to step on another person's boot, and maybe that boot stepper is going to get their neck stepped on by another boot that's even bigger. But thank you guys so much for supporting independent media. Keep on supporting it. There's a panel that's happening later tonight on the political matrix. I just wanted to plug that in, which Glory Jones will be on there. Nico House tomorrow, right? My bad. I thought it was today because they usually have their panels at night.
Yeah,
But-
I think that one is going to be on What I've Been Thinking with Marcus Cage. But yeah, I'll plug it. So tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time, 4:30 p.m. East Coast time, me, Sabby Sabs, Dontel from Unapologetic, and Nico House from Mikasa Sukasa. We're going to be on What I've Been Thinking with Marcus Cage, with Marcus, Young Morpheus Rage, Marcus Cage, and his co-host, Chris Lawson. And yeah, it's going to be a nice Black History Month sketch. It's going to be a nice Black History Month stream. So yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to pissing off YouTube for Black History Month while they put a little fist on their icon or whatever the fuck they do while they censor Black content creators. So yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they've been killing it over there at the Political Matrix, and What I've Been Thinking. The Convo Couch has been killing it. RBN has been killing it. Meg's been killing it. Everyone in independent media has been killing it. And we can't do it without you guys, you lovely people in the audience. Thank you so much for supporting us. And keep in mind, you're not alone. And I know you'll stay informed. Take care.